All right, let's now bring in SABC News specialist correspondent Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, a very good afternoon to you. So, of course, we are listening and hearing various nations condemning what has happened, some also sitting on the fence. Let's turn it back to home now. How do you read the ANC's language compared to the South African government itself, its formal statements? Are they aligned in substance, or does the party go further than the state?
I think the party was upfront. When you look at the words used by the ANC Secretary-General, he was actually preparing us that the statement was going to be robust, using the words such as fragmented and hesitant. Words will not help. In other words, you have to be upfront with this. I think the ANC NEC yesterday looked at the government statement that is DERCO, that was diplomatic and focused on international law and the UN Charter, then calling for the emergency meeting of the Security Council. The government was quite measured, and understandably so, because it has been the government's position to use the institutions that are available. Some are agencies of the United Nations to argue particular positions as it relates to challenges the world is facing. And therefore, DERCO's statement was more measured. But the ANC, as a political party, Friends of Venezuelan, used a more robust statement as the political party because they went as far as calling for the release of President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. The government statement didn't call for that. They were going to take cue from what was going to transpire in the Security Council yesterday. And therefore, you can see that at government level, you still are focusing on international law. You are focusing on the UN Charter. The same with the ANC, focusing on the UN Charter, the international law, but going even further to say, release these people immediately. And therefore, you can see that my information is that based on hostility between government and the US administration, the government didn't want to play in the hands of the US as a government in terms of being provocative. But as the political party, the ANC, after discussions in the highest decision-making body before conferences or between conferences, that is the NEC, gave marching orders. And therefore, you will see now going forward, ANC members will stick to the ANC position, which is more upfront. We saw the president doing the same and even arguing that he is more upfront because there was a consultation within the National Executive Committee, which is the highest decision-making body of the ANC between conferences, and the SACP weighing in, even announcing that on Thursday, they will be part of the protests outside the US Embassy. You can see where the alliance is right now on this matter.
Absolutely, and I was going to reference the SACP, given that they've twice now, condemned that action. Also very strong words. And you also write about, South African government needing to walk this tightrope. Let's talk then about it, in terms of the implementations. South Africa's, particularly President Ramaphosa, is already under fire. When you look at cases like the ICJ, is this not going to cause more antagonism with the U.S. administration, do you think, given the just the various the various strategies that South Africa needs to be taking now, particularly when you look at geopolitics?
Well, it's already happening. When you look at in South Africa, those on the right are already saying South Africa, condemning South Africa's statement because it doesn't go far enough and it is almost like double standard. And the right-wing groups in South Africa and individuals already saying the same must happen in South Africa, looking at perhaps America must do exactly what it has done in Venezuela, in South Africa. And that is why many ordinary citizens, when you look at social media, they are up in arms. And the right-wing groups and individuals don't realize that when you do that, you open old wounds. You unite the majority because you are now opening old wounds.
Yeah.
By saying that must happen in South Africa. And you know how some people feel about the United States of America in South Africa as a dominant force and almost like the police of the world. And therefore, and I expect the US also, they will not take kind of the ANC statement. And you know Marco Rubio and President Trump, one will be monitoring their social media today. What will be the reaction to different statements from different countries? But what's clear is that many countries and many people around the world, the majority is saying this was a violation of international law, violation of the UN Charter Article 1 and 2. And therefore, that's a common position. On Maduro, there are different views. But the reality, as Professor Jeffrey Sachs said yesterday, the UN Security Council yesterday was not about Maduro per se. It was about the violation of international law and the violation of the UN Charter Article 1 and 2. And South Africa's statement spoke to that. That, again, you can see that they stuck to diplomacy and what was on the table yesterday, because it was about that.
Yeah, let's quickly listen to other voices in the country. I mean, the DA also issuing a statement, weighing in and criticizing the ANC. Let's listen to this and then let's get your views on this, Sophie.
The Department of International Relations and Cooperation's appeal to the United Nations Security Council to urgently convene and discuss the capture and prosecution of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by the United States of America smacks of hypocrisy and contradiction, as DIRCO failed to take a similar stance on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This exposes the politically selective and hypocritical means in which the African National Congress conducts South Africa's diplomatic relations on the international stage. Diplomacy cannot be built on contradictions and inconsistencies. In the context of the situation in Venezuela, the ANC has yet again decided to pursue its entrenched party political interests in our foreign policy by referring the USA to the United Nations Security Council when no such appeal for intervention was ever made when Russian President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine and was found guilty of human rights abuses for child trafficking. The Department of International Relations and Cooperation cannot cite international law or make reference to refraining from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or the fact that military invasions against sovereign states yield only instability and deepen crisis when it has shown diplomatic cowardice by turning a blind eye to the violation of Ukrainian sovereignty by the Russian Federation. To quote the department's own letter to the United Nations Security Council, the stability of the international system depends not only on the respect, but on the consistent application of these established legal norms. One can only assume that the ANC has adopted a two-faced approach to South Africa's foreign policy to protect its own party interests over the interests of South Africa. This is a gross betrayal of the values and principles enshrined in the South African Constitution. The ANC cannot expect South Africa to be taken seriously by this recent appeal to the United Nations Security Council when it continues to position itself as a mediator in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Democratic Alliance strongly opposes the Department of International Relations and Cooperations being politicized to pursue party political interests instead of pursuing foreign policy in the national interest. This approach has rendered South Africa an inconsistent, unreliable, and unserious player on the international stage. There is no room for ambiguity or the interpretation of a violation of state sovereignty. That principle applies equally to all international aggressors, Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation included. The ANC no longer holds a political majority and cannot continue to show diplomatic hypocrisy and the selective application of international law in South Africa's international engagements. The DA condemns this development and demands that the Department of International Relations and Cooperation act consistently in international law or refrain from embarrassing South Africa in the international arena.
Give us your take, Sophie, on this. I mean, does the DA have a case? This is a party that is in the GNU. On foreign policy, it looks like the two parties will have different views.
Well, let's start with the DA as a political party. What was DA's position when Israel invaded Palestine, Gaza in particular? So when you talk about double standards, there's a tendency for political parties and countries taking or applying double standards, they themselves, because of personal interest. Secondly, when you look at the statement of South Africa on the, it was on the 8th of April, 2022, at that time, the DA was not part of the Government of National Unity. The first statement that was issued, it was very robust. It spoke about Russia Federation used force without sanction by UN, which is almost the same statement they are using now with Venezuela crisis. Secondly, there was a paragraph that says South Africa has always opposed violation of the sovereignty of state and territorial integrity of member states. That is the UN Charter, Article 1 and 2, that they used as DERCO. Lastly, recently, that was last year in September on the 10th, when there were strong attacks on Ukraine, South Africa issued a very strong statement against Russia again, even calling for release of children and prisoners of war and all of that. So I think it's for the viewer to judge based on those facts. But also South Africa, at the very same time, when they issued that statement on the 8th of April 2022, they raised concerns around double standards, saying that much as there has to be a strong condemnation of Russia, nothing has been done as it relates to the plight of the Palestinian. A similar condemnation from strong superpowers is not there in protection of the Palestinians whose land has been occupied by Israel, because the International Court of Justice in 2024 also indicated that occupation is similar to invasion. So I think that's my view in terms of what has been happening. But the issue of double standards, all political parties tend to do that based on their interest. As I made an example that some political parties in the country, the plight of Palestinians doesn't count. They get very diplomatic on the question of the Middle East. So I think that's the problem we have. That is why even on Venezuela, people are saying some powerful forces in the West are playing double standards.
Absolutely. Sophie, thank you so much for that comprehensive report. Of course, we're following various vantage points for you on this particular story. and we'll continue to track it. Of course, the SABC News specialist correspondent Sophie Mokoena there for us.